Greetings, everyone, Muslim, non-Muslim, ex-Muslim, and everyone in between. It's Wednesday, April 20th. Beautiful evening out here in Minnesota. It's still cold, but at least there's no snow, and it's just been raining a lot, which kind of, I don't know, I love rain. Rain really puts me in the mood. And so I decided it's been a while, and I apologize. It's been so hectic reaching those last weeks of the semester. I'm going to be doing some crazy grading and just dealing with my students. So I said, I got a little bit of time. Let me just put something up because I know it's been a while, and decided I was looking through this, forgetting the name of the video, but I'm going to share my screen. There was some comments that I saw, and I decided, well, let me start some kind of video with just like a conversation video where I can get feedback from others. I'm curious for viewers to see what they think about these comments, and then something that I thought of and put together for you to look at visually and discuss this whole issue of revelation, or the Islamic notion of revelation. I find it fascinating and interesting. I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to take a look at some comments on the video. I'm forgetting the video. Well, let me move myself over a bit here. And so there's I'm going to start on the right-hand side and then the left, and I might look the other way to you in the video. But this person left this amazing comment. It says, revelation, the act of revealing or making known. In the religious sense, revelation usually means divine revelation. This is meaningless, since revelation can only be revelation in the first instance. For example, if God revealed something to me, that would be a divine revelation to me. If I then told someone else what God told me, it would be mere hearsay to the person I tell. If that person believed what I said, they would not be putting their trust in God, but in me, believing what I told them was actually true. And then there's another quote here. Revealed religion, an organized system of belief in and worship of God, based on the belief that God communicated or communicates with certain individuals or individual founders, members of the particular revealed religion. As mentioned above, by believing in any of the revealed religions, a believer is not putting their trust in God, but in the person or people making the claim of receiving the divine revelation. And instantly, I thought of Muhammad and his claims of prophethood, and I thought about that in that sense, that it went from the divine revelation went from God or Allah to Muhammad. And then that is considered meaningless because that revelation in the first instance is only revealed at then and there. And connected to that, they're talking about deism. So I think these are deists that are making this comments, but they define deism, the recognition of a universal creative force greater than that demonstrated by mankind, supported by personal observation of laws and designs in nature and the universe, perpetuated and validated by the innate ability of human reason, coupled with the rejection of claims made by individuals and organized religions of having received special divine revelation. And I think I might agree or disagree with that. I'm still looking more into deism just out of curiosity. I mean, I'm still in that area of agnosticism, and to some extent, my atheism at least extends towards the Abrahamic faiths. Not totally sure I can rule out. I like what deism is saying, but then there's some other areas that are problematic. But I like this comment under deism. They put cult, and it says, in deism, a cult is an embracing of unreasonable beliefs by a group of people. Based on this definition, and this is what really struck me, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all cults because their members suspend their God-given reason in order to believe or accept the unreasonable dogmatic teachings and superstitions, such as God giving real estate as a gift to the Jews, the resurrection and ascension of Jesus, faith healing as just one example of faith healing being a superstition. If faith healing was real, innocent, helpless children would not be dying from the attempts of their parents at biblical faith healing, and Muhammad's ascension to heaven, among many more false and unreasonable claims. I wanted to share these comments because I thought about Islamic revelation, or the Islamic notion of revelation, based on this comment, and kind of put together something visual. And I want to see what everyone thinks about this. But if we think about this idea of revelation as defined in the comment, the idea of revealed religion, this idea of deism versus theism, and this idea of what's a cult, then I think we have a pretty good argument in these comments against the Islamic notion of revelation. And what I've developed here, let me just make this a little bit larger and then move myself over this way. So if we think about that notion of Islamic revelation in those comments, I thought of like some passages in the Quran where Allah is alleged by Muhammad, Allah is addressing a group of people. And so that would be known as al-Khitab. It's an address, right, to a group of people, addressees. And I thought of one of many verses. What came to my mind from my memorization of the Quran is Surah Al-Saf, which is chapter 61, verses 2 to 3. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لما تقولون ما لا تفعلون كبر مقتا عند الله أن تقولوا ما لا تفعلون, which translates as, "O those of you who believe, why do you all say what you all do not do? It is most disliked by Allah that you all say what you all do not do." When we think about revelation in that comment that I read, there's only two ways you can really look at this. And there probably are some other ones that I haven't thought of, but from the aspect of believing in Islamic revelation, which is called al-Wahy. Now, if you believe the Quran is the word of Allah, right? Kalam Allah, غير مخلوق, that is the speech of Allah, it's not created. Then what you're saying here as a believer is that, and there's two things here. One, if you're a believer, then what you're saying here is that Allah is having a monologue with himself, basically, right? And I'll tell you why I think that. And then second, if you don't believe that the Quran is the divine speech of Allah, and you believe Muhammad is the mu'allif, that he's the author, then the Quran is regulated to being a diary of Muhammad's daily thoughts. It's a yomiyat, right? This diary of what he was experiencing. And I say this because if we look at, and I know I'm still kind of like, I still do things like the way I read Arabic, from right to left. But and this is why I put it, I put time that way. But if we think about this, and I think this is where I want to hear the comments about this. Revelation really can't be real revelation if the Quran is not created. Because, and there's a hadith that tells us, I'm just going to read it to you, and then we'll talk about what this is here. There's a well-known hadith where Muhammad says, إِنَّ أَوَّلَ مَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ الْقَلَمِ, that the first thing that Allah created was the pen. فَقَالَ لَهُ, and so he says, Allah says to the pen, اكتب, write. It's an imperative, فعل الأمر. قال, the pen says to Allah, ربي وماذا أكتب, oh my Lord, what should I write? قال, so Allah says to the pen, اكتب مقادير كل شيء حتى تقوم الساعة. Write the maqadir, right? Maqadir here is jama'. It's plural of the word miqdar. Miqdar is a quantity of something. Miqdar appears in the Quran, Surah Sajda. So it's saying here, write the maqadir, the plural of miqdar, the quantity, or the quantity of everything that will be created until the day of judgment, until the final hour. This is Rawahu Abu Dawud. This is considered an authentic narration. And so the thought process here for me is the idea of al-Wahy, of Islamic revelation. It can't be something new if it's always existed. And so what would have to have existed is before the pen wrote in the lahu mahfuz, in the preserved tablet, there had to have been a pre-Quran, right? Because where was the Quran before Allah wrote it in the lahu mahfuz? Well, we can only deduce it had to be in the mind of Allah, right? I hope the ultra-religious believe Allah has a mind. And so then we'd have to think about a pre-Quran, right? Before this time, Allah's words, they hadn't been spoken and therefore were non-existent, right? Because this khitab here that we're looking at, like this example of these addresses in the Quran, they're talking about a people who hadn't even existed yet, right? So how is Allah, his speech created when, how is his speech not created when these words wouldn't make sense until Allah utters them, right? So, and this is where there's the issue of Islamic revelation for those comments gets kind of fuzzy, because the only way we can understand it, talking about either believing that it's a monologue with Allah, with himself, before he puts it on paper in the Lahu Mahfuz, and then, or it's the diary of Muhammad's daily thoughts, so Yomiyat, that pre-Quran is what the Quran is before Allah utters the words and puts it on the Lahu Mahfuz. And then in the Lahu Mahfuz, Allah writes his thoughts in that preserved tablet using the qalam. And then the first account of revelation happens. This is the time when Allah actually speaks the words, right? Because in the pre-Quran and in the Lahu Mahfuz, that can't be spoken speech. That can't be kalam in that sense. It's al-kitaba, it's what's written. Allah hasn't uttered anything, right? So that first-hand account, the time when Allah speaks these words to Gabriel or Jibril, Allah's speech is then manifested. And here's the khitab, right? And then it makes sense about that comment. And that after Allah speaks that to Jibril, Allah speaking to Jibril, that instance, that notion of revelation is totally lost, because now all Jibril is doing is a second-hand account, is taking the message from Allah and giving it to Muhammad. So it's kind of like sloppy seconds, right? The message went from being in the mind of Allah, being in the Lahu Mahfuz, then when Allah decides to actually speak them, he speaks them to Gabriel in the form of a monologue, mind you. Gabriel hears that, takes it down to Muhammad, and this is when Jibril speaks these words to Muhammad. Now, of course, I know some are going to say the Prophet received revelation in different ways. There are three other ways. Actually, there's two other ways, altogether three in Sahih Bukhari. There might be others, but from what we know, the most common is when he said that Jibril would come to him and give him the revelation. Another is in the form of a dream. He says, ru'ya. And then the other one is in the ringing of a bell. And that is the hardest for him to grasp. Nevertheless, though, from the first-hand account to the second-hand account, by the time Muhammad utters these words to the companions, that's the third-hand account, then the companions have written it down, and this is what we've gotten from the companions, okay? And so you can see definitely it loses its luster. The revelation is not what one would really want to contemplate as being speech in the true sense of speech. It's a written word expressed, and that idea, that notion of Islamic revelation, of al-Wahy, when we think about it from this particular viewpoint, doesn't make it unique at all. And I think I definitely agree. When we look at this isnad of the Quran, and we go back to this particular area and think about it in the context of Muhammad, the act of revealing or of making known, in the religious sense, revelation usually means divine revelation. I'll put it in Islamic terms, al-Wahy. This is meaningless. So al-Wahy would then be meaningless, since the Wahy, the revelation, can only be Wahy, revelation, in the first instance. And that first instance was when Allah, either when he wrote it, had it in his mind, put it on the book, on the Lahu Mahfuz, or in the first instance when he spoke it, right? And it became kalam. For example, if Allah revealed something to Muhammad, that would be divine revelation. So it's not revealed to Muhammad in that way. The isnad is Allah, Jibril, Muhammad. So the revelation really is, if Allah revealed something to Jibril, that would be a divine revelation to Allah and Jibril. If Jibril then tells that to if Jibril then told Muhammad what Allah told him, then it would be hearsay, right? And if that person, Muhammad, believed what was said, then who, in other words, this is where it gets fuzzy and lost, is we are believing that Muhammad is having divine revelation from God, and yet the divine revelation itself is not a first-hand account. It is Allah speaking through an intermediary, through Jibril. And this is why the Ayatul Gharaniq, the verse of the what they call the so-called satanic verses, which I'll talk about later in the summer. This is why it's so controversial, because Muhammad couldn't even distinguish between the words of Shaitan versus the words of Jibril, right? And there's a whole lot there too that we can look at, because if we look at the hadith of al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, there's this idea that Allah spoke directly to Muhammad, and some would differ about that. There's also this idea that those who reject the Shaitan whispering to Muhammad and Muhammad confusing the ayats, right? In Surah An-Najm. There's actually three views, and the view that is held by the majority of the ulama deals with this issue of Ismatul Anbiya, which came later on, even though Ibn Taymiyyah himself was of the opinion that the narration of the satanic verses is authentic. So putting it all into perspective here, and I guess where I'm really wanting to get from the viewers is just, what are your thoughts? What are your ideas on this whole thing of Islamic notion? Do you agree with this comment about revelation and revealed religion? How do you see this whole idea and the whole isnad of Islamic revelation when we look at it from this way of the pre-Quran, lahu mahfuz Quran, first-hand account, second-hand account, third-hand account? I'm curious, I really am. And that's just something briefly that I wanted to share with viewers. I got to get back to doing grading, but just thought I would leave you with that. And I'm looking forward to seeing what everyone is thinking. Forgot to say Ramadan Kareem or Ramadan Mubarak to all of my Muslim family members. And for everyone else, stay gold.